In the summer of 1849, the small, sleepy town of Natchez, Mississippi, wore a veil far darker than its humid air would suggest. Beneath the magnolias and the quiet sway of the Mississippi River, a sinister tale was beginning to unravel, a story that would forever stain the town's history and echo through the corridors of its oldest courthouse. At the heart of this disturbing mystery was Judge Thomas Clay, a man respected and feared in equal measure, whose very presence cast a shadow darker than the southern night. From the outside, Thomas Clay seemed the epitome of justice and civility. He wore his black robes with dignity, his silver hair combed meticulously, and his sharp eyes scrutinized every case with unwavering seriousness. To the citizens of Natchez, he was a pillar of law and order, a figure who exuded authority. Yet, within the confines of his courtroom, and deeper still beneath its very floorboards, lay secrets so grim that their revelation would shake the town to its core. Thomas Clay was not born into power. His origins were modest, but he had clawed his way through the ranks of the local judiciary with an insatiable hunger for control and mystique. Rumors swirled about him, whispers of strange rituals performed behind closed doors, of servants who vanished without explanation, and of a courtroom that held more than just the weight of justice. These rumors, initially dismissed as gossip typical of small-town politics, began to gain traction as unexplained disappearances among the courthouse staff grew more frequent. It was in the oppressive heat of July that the first of these servants went missing. Mary Ellen, a shy young maid with no known family, vanished without notice. Her duties were simple: cleaning the chambers and delivering messages during court sessions. When she failed to return after a weekend visit to see her sister, concern rippled through the courthouse staff. Yet Thomas Clay's reaction was startlingly cold and indifferent. His terse dismissal of inquiries into Mary Ellen's whereabouts only fueled suspicion. As days turned into weeks, more servants disappeared, never on the same night, but in a pattern too precise to be coincidence. Each absence was met by the judge's unnerving calm, a calm that seemed to harden with every inquiry. Rumors morphed into fearful whispers. Thomas Clay was implicated in their disappearance, accused by the desperate servants' families of harboring dark intentions. But no evidence surfaced. The judge's position shielded him, his influence casting a protective cloak over his darkest deeds. Behind the stoic facade, Thomas Clay was engaged in rituals of a secretive nature, known only to himself and a handful of whispered confidants. The courthouse, a grand brick building with tall pillars and intricate ironwork, was said to conceal a labyrinth beneath its foundation. It was in these hidden chambers that the judge conducted ceremonies of a chilling nature, rituals believed to bind the fate of those who entered them to his own ruthless will local. Law spoke of clay figures buried beneath the courtroom floor, shaped in the forms of the missing servants. The stories claimed that these effigies were part of a macabre ritual aimed at securing the judge's power and influence, rituals that twisted justice into something far more sinister and personal. Every hearing in that courthouse seemed shadowed, not just by the weight of law but by the lingering presence of the lost souls beneath. Despite mounting unease, no one dared openly challenge Judge Clay. His family was deeply entrenched in the town's elite. His courtroom decisions shaped the lives of all who lived there, and his eyes, piercing and indifferent, were a constant reminder of the price of defiance. The tension in Natchez grew unbearable as whispers turned into cries for truth. Unraveling the dark tapestry of Judge Thomas Clay's deeds promised to reveal a chilling nexus of power, despair, and unspeakable rituals. But the deeper the community probed, the more elusive the truth became. This was a man who judged with an iron fist, yet hid his most brutal judgments beneath the floorboards, far from the world's sight. And as the shadows lengthened over Natchez, the question lingered: what truly lay beneath the courtroom's polished wood, and who would dare uncover it? The tale of Thomas Clay was only beginning, and the night that veiled Natchez in unrelenting darkness was yet to reach its climax. Soon the invisible threads binding the fate of the judge, his missing servants, and the town itself would begin to unravel, threatening not only justice, but the very soul of Mississippi's most notorious courtroom. Thomas Clay's story was one rooted in ambition and darkness from its earliest days. Before he donned the black robes that conferred power and respect, he was a boy born into a modest family, on the outskirts of Natchez, Mississippi. His father was a farmer, and his mother a seamstress, both hard-working but trapped by the strict social hierarchies of the antebellum South. From childhood, Thomas showed an unusual hunger for knowledge and control, a trait that would define his entire life. The town of Natchez, rich with the commerce of the Mississippi River, was a place where power was often inherited rather than earned. But Thomas's mind and determination quickly set him apart. He was a voracious reader, devouring books on law, politics, and ancient rituals. Texts he acquired through discreet dealings and quiet borrowing from the town's scarce libraries. His intellect and charisma caught the attention of a local judge who took the young Thomas under his wing, mentoring him in the intricacies of the law and courtly influence. By the time Thomas Clay reached his 20s, his ascent was rapid and calculated. He secured a position as a court clerk, leveraging it to study case files and court proceedings with intense scrutiny. His sharp observations eventually led to an appointment as a judge, bypassing several more senior candidates through political maneuvering and whispered promises. The townspeople began to see him as a man destined for greatness, except his brilliance concealed something far more chilling. It was during his early years as a judge that the first murmurs of his obsession with power took shape. Thomas became fascinated not only with the law, but with controlling the fate of those who stood before him. He wasn't content simply to decide verdicts. He wanted to exercise dominion over life and death itself, to etch his influence permanently into the court's very foundation. Rumors spread among courthouse workers about strange noises coming from the judge's chambers late at night. They spoke of flickering candlelight, cryptic chants, and the faint scent of burning herbs twisting through the stale air. Those closest to Thomas noted his changed demeanor. His eyes glinted with something unnatural, and his once measured voice grew commanding and urgent, as if speaking to unseen entities rather than his staff. Behind the imposing walls of the courthouse, Thomas had constructed a hidden sanctum beneath the floorboards, a cold, damp labyrinth illuminated by the flickering shadows of lanterns. This subterranean lair was where the judge carried out rituals meant to bind the spirits of his servants to his will. Servants who had served him faithfully in life found themselves trapped in death beneath the courtroom, their bodies interred beneath layers of clay and earth, symbolically cemented to the ground that his authority ruled. Family members of the missing servants sensed something was tragically wrong. One by one, wives, siblings, and friends came forward, desperate for answers. The local sheriff conducted discreet inquiries, but faced mounting pressure, as Thomas Clay's influence suffocated the investigation. Witnesses who came too close to the truth either vanished or recanted their statements under mysterious circumstances. The judge's rituals, obscure and unsettling, seemed to have been born from an unholy blend of folk magic and his own ego. They were designed not only to silence his critics, but to protect himself from any downfall. Inscribed in a journal uncovered decades later were references to ancient texts describing souls trapped in clay effigies, bound to serve their master beyond the grave. These rituals gave Thomas Clay an ability to command unquestioned loyalty and fear among those who worked at the courthouse. Clay's courtroom became a theater of terror disguised as justice. His rulings grew harsher, disproportionately punishing those he deemed threats or nuisances. The missing servants were subtly replaced by others who dared not question the judge's authority, trapped in a cycle of servitude from which there was no escape. Those who resisted found no recourse. The judge's presence was omnipresent and inescapable. One such servant was Eliza, a young woman known for her courage and sharp mind. She had heard the rumors but hoped to escape their truth through hard work and discretion. Yet after witnessing the judge's cold indifference when others vanished, she began to investigate quietly. Her inquiries led her to the hidden entrance beneath the courtroom, where layers of cracked brick and dust concealed a chilling secret. Eliza's discovery would prove pivotal, though at a terrifying cost. Local legend tells that the night Eliza disappeared, the town's air grew heavy with a suffocating sense of dread. Her screams were never heard, and her fate was sealed beneath the floorboards alongside the others. Those who dared to speak of her disappearance faced the judge's wrath, confirming that Thomas Clay had mastered the art of terror cloaked in respectability. Yet it was not just fear that kept the town silent. It was the intricate web of politics, wealth and social ties that Thomas Clay wove over years. He had powerful allies who benefited from his rulings and authority. Anyone challenging the judge risked not just personal ruin, but the collapse of their social standing in the tightly knit community. Despite attempts to probe deeper, evidence remained elusive. The judge's family vehemently denied all accusations, portraying Thomas as a man devoted to justice and order, a victim of baseless slander. However, as the years passed and the missing accumulated, the courthouse itself seemed haunted, not by ghosts, but by the weight of its concealed sins. On a humid autumn evening, a local reporter named Samuel Powell arrived in Natchez, driven by a thirst for truth. Samuel was young but determined, carrying letters of concern from families and whispers of the judge's rituals. He was immediately struck by the palpable tension that clung to the town and the courthouse's ominous presence. What he would find over the coming months would forever change the town's narrative. Samuel's investigations were meticulous. He spoke quietly with servants, quietly observed the judge, and took note of overlooked details, faint markings on floorboards, unexplained drafts beneath the courtroom door, and the odd, unsettling calm with which Thomas Clay conducted his proceedings. His investigation made waves, unsettling the fabric of power that Clay had constructed. Some townspeople began to question their loyalty to the man who had ruled them with iron resolve. Yet, Samuel knew that exposing the truth meant putting himself in grave danger. The line between justice and vengeance was blurred in Natchez, and Judge Clay was prepared to defend his secrets at all costs. As the night deepened over Mississippi, the shadows beneath the courtroom floor grew longer, wrapping the town in a suffocating silence. The mystery of Thomas Clay, judge, ritualist, and secret torturer, was far from revealed. And while some sought light and justice, the dark rituals binding the lost servants beneath the floors waited patiently, a grim reminder of unchecked power's horrifying cost. The story was unfolding piece by piece, and the question lingered: would the truth ever free the nearby souls trapped forever beneath Natchez's most feared courtroom? Or would the wicked rituals of Thomas Clay secure his dominion for generations to come? The answers lay hidden in the darkness, waiting for those brave enough to confront them. As the autumn leaves fell softly over Natchez in 1849, an invisible darkness crept through the town's streets and alleys, an ominous weight pressing heavier with each passing day. The courthouse, once a symbol of justice and order, had become a place of fear. The missing servants were not merely whispered rumors anymore. Their disappearances had become undeniable, leaving families desperate for answers. The first to vanish had been Mary Ellen, a quiet servant who earned no enemies and had cared for the courthouse chambers with unwavering diligence. When she stopped showing up for her duties, many assumed she had gone to visit family or find better work. But days turned into weeks, and not a word came from her. Then came Thomas, a young stable hand whose loss was less noticed at first, but soon the sheriff received word from his worried mother. She pleaded for an investigation, but those pleas were met with silence or worse, veiled threats. The courthouse itself seemed to absorb all inquiries, its walls closing tighter around its secrets. More servants disappeared: Eliza, Samuel, and others, each vanishing under similar mysterious circumstances. The pattern was too complex to deny, sparking panic among the town's inhabitants. No one felt safe, yet no one dared speak openly for fear of retaliation. Every instance of disappearance shared chilling similarities. The missing last seen entering the courthouse late at night, or taken away under mysterious pretenses, by figures shrouded in darkness. Witnesses reported hearing muffled cries or strange noises echoing from the basement chambers beneath the courtroom, but these accounts were dismissed or hushed quickly. Sheriff Caleb Johnson, a man respected for his integrity, was determined to uncover the truth, but his authority was undercut by Judge Clay's unshakable grip on the community. Clay's family wielded influence throughout Natchez, and so the sheriff's efforts were sabotaged by mysterious delays, falsified reports, and intimidation. One chilling night, Sheriff Johnson, accompanied by 2 deputies, ventured beneath the courthouse, following rumors of a hidden passage under the judge's chambers. The air grew cold and stale as they descended a narrow staircase, the faint glow of their lanterns casting grotesque shadows on the ancient bricks. What they found beneath the floor was a network of small, claustrophobic rooms, their ceilings thick with cobwebs and the scent of earth and decay. The walls bore strange symbols, deep grooves carved into the stone, shapes that seemed to pulse in the flickering light. At the center was a large chamber where the earth was disturbed freshly, as if someone had been digging recently. Their search was interrupted when an eerie silence fell. The faint echo of footsteps above hinted that they were not alone. Hastily retreating, the sheriff realized this discovery was just the surface of something far more sinister. He knew the judge must be involved in whatever darkness plagued the courthouse. Back in the town square, children played obliviously while adults looked on nervously. Rumors spread of curses and forbidden magic, of spirits trapped beneath the courthouse floor forever bound to the judge's will. People whispered of Thomas Clay's obsession with ancient rites, evoking fear more profound than any law he enforced. Amid this growing tension, a local schoolteacher, Miss Abigail Turner, began her own quiet investigation. Known for her compassion and sharp mind, she gathered testimonies from the families of the missing, piecing together patterns the authorities ignored. Her resolve was born from personal connection. Her own sister was among those vanished without a trace. Miss Turner's discoveries were unsettling. Many servants had spoken of strange chants echoing during the night, of candles extinguishing suddenly, and of a haunting presence watching them ominously. Servants warned newcomers not to linger near certain parts of the courthouse, especially the courtroom's floor, which seemed to hum with a chilling energy. Reluctantly, some townsfolk started convening in secret, sharing fears and plans to confront the growing evil. But they knew one fact all too well. Judge Thomas Clay was not a man to challenge openly. His reputation, wealth, and control over the legal system made him untouchable in the eyes of most. Yet the judge's facade began to crack. His public rulings became more erratic, harsher sentences imposed on even the slightest offenses. Some believed this was the price he paid for dabbling in sinister rituals, the weight of dark deeds twisting his once sharp mind into something unstable. One pivotal evening, Miss Turner managed to sneak into a side chamber of the courthouse after hours. Guided by years of accumulated whispers, she found a concealed trapdoor under a thick Persian rug. Below, the cold air hit her like a blow, but her resolve outmatched the creeping fear. As she descended into the underground chamber, her lantern illuminated rows of clay figures, crudely shaped yet hauntingly lifelike. Each figure seemed to embody a missing servant, their forms bound in clay, their likenesses chillingly accurate. Miss Turner's heart pounded as she realized the full horror of Thomas Clay's secret. He wasn't just burying servants physically. He was trapping their souls in these effigies, wielding dark power over those he had silenced. Her breath caught when she discovered a tattered journal left carelessly on a stone altar. The pages were filled with cryptic notes, ritual instructions, and confessions penned in a shaky hand. It detailed how Judge Clay believed these rituals granted him eternal control and protection from any challenge. Miss Turner's discovery was profound, but dangerous. With this knowledge, she knew the risk she faced from exposing the truth. Still, the town needed to understand the terrible cost of their silence. As shadows lengthened over Natchez, tensions reached a breaking point. The missing were no longer just absences, but profound wounds on the community's soul, and silence was no longer an option. The webs of power and fear spun by Judge Clay threatened to engulf anyone who dared seek justice. The stage was set for confrontation between the darkness beneath the courthouse and the light of truth Miss Turner and the townsfolk desperately sought. But Thomas Clay was watching, always watching, and his wicked rituals still pulsed with ancient power, waiting to claim any who opposed him. The story of Natchez was no longer just about disappearances. It was a battle for justice and the fate of souls trapped beneath a courtroom floor. And the question remained, who would step forward to break the cycle before the darkness consumed them all? The air in Natchez was thick with tension as the townspeople braced for what would become the pivotal moment in their long, harrowing ordeal. The secrecy that had cloaked Judge Thomas Clay's courtroom and its sinister rituals was unraveling, pulled loose by the courage of those unwilling to accept darkness as law. The battle lines had finally been drawn, and the night of reckoning was at hand. Abigail Turner, Samuel Powell, and Sheriff Caleb Johnson had prepared carefully. Months of gathering evidence, hearing testimonies, and piecing together the terrifying truth culminated in this single act, confronting the judge and ending his reign of terror, or disappearing into the shadows themselves. They moved with quiet determination, their nerves tempered by the knowledge that failure was not an option. As the town's clock chimed midnight, they gathered near the grand courthouse. The imposing brick structure loomed overhead, its pillars fading into the darkness, masking the horrors buried beneath. The group slipped through a back entrance left unattended during the judge's ritual, stepping lightly down the narrow staircase leading to the underground chambers. The dim glow of oil lamps reflected off damp stone walls etched with cryptic symbols. An eerie silence enveloped the subterranean maze, broken only by the faint drip of water echoing in the stillness. The air was chilled, a stark contrast to the heavy summer heat outside, and the odor of earth and clay permeated the confined space. At the center of the labyrinth lay the altar room, a small chamber where the judge's most potent rituals had been performed. Arrayed on the cold floor were the clay effigies, grotesque representations of the vanished servants, frozen forever in silent agony. Each figure seemed to pulse with a dark life of its own, the binding magic radiating from them like a malevolent heartbeat. Suddenly, a crackling sound filled the chamber as torches flared to life along the walls, illuminating a group of dark-robed figures standing in a tight circle around the altar. At their center, Judge Thomas Clay himself knelt, chanting a low incantation, his face obscured by shadows cast from the flickering flames. The arrival of Abigail and her allies did not go unnoticed. The judge's chant faltered as his sharp eyes locked onto the intruders. Rising swiftly to his full height, he commanded an eerie silence, his voice cold and authoritative. "Who dares to disrupt the balance I have secured?" His eyes blazed with a furious intensity. "You meddle with forces beyond your understanding." Abigail stepped forward, her voice steady despite the palpable danger. "We are here to end your tyranny, Judge Clay. The missing servants, the dark rituals, they will no longer be hidden beneath this floor. Justice will be served." A tense moment stretched between them, the flicker of torchlight casting long shadows on their faces. Then, without warning, Clay lunged toward the altar, snatching up an ancient relic, an iron dagger inscribed with arcane symbols. His allies closed ranks, chanting in unison, the air thickening with an unseen power as the atmosphere shifted. The binding magic that had held the servants' souls began to ripple and surge, the clay figures glowing faintly in response. The confrontation erupted in chaos. Abigail and her group faced a barrage of dark forces. Samuel moved swiftly, using his lantern to throw light on the symbols that shimmered on the walls, hoping to break the enchantments rooted in the ancient carvings. Sheriff Johnson, relying on brute force and grit, pushed through the robed men to reach the altar, determined to dismantle the ritual apparatus. The clash of wills in that chamber was raw and primal, light against darkness, courage versus corruption. Amid the scuffle, Judge Clay's voice rose above all, his chanting becoming a frantic plea for power. The air itself seemed to pulse and whirl as unseen forces surged, attempting to repel the intruders and maintain control. Yet, Abigail had come prepared. From her satchel, she produced pages from the judge's journal, spells and counter-rituals painstakingly transcribed. With a commanding voice, she began to recite the incantation that would sever the magistrate's hold over the restless spirits. Clay's face twisted with rage and fear as the power binding the clay effigies began to break apart. Cracks spidered across the figures, light spilling from fissures where darkness had reigned. The chamber trembled, dust cascading from the ancient ceilings as the foundation's sinister grip loosened. The robed figures stumbled, their chanting faltering, then finally ceasing. One by one they retreated into the shadows, leaving Judge Clay isolated and exposed. Realizing his defeat, Clay lashed out in desperation, rushing towards Abigail with the iron dagger raised. But Sheriff Johnson intervened, seizing the judge's arm and wresting the weapon away. The struggle was fierce, but the combined strength of the group subdued Clay. Panting and defeated, the judge was bound with rough rope scavenged from the courthouse storage, his dark ambitions finally contained. Outside, the night had shifted. The weight pressing down on Natchez seemed to lift, replaced by a fragile sense of relief. The missing servants' souls, once imprisoned in twisted clay forms beneath the courtroom, were now free, released by the broken curses and the courage of those who refused to submit. In the hours that followed, townsfolk gathered cautiously, the stories of the judge's wicked rites spreading as truth illuminated long-held shadows. The courthouse that had instilled fear now symbolized hope and renewal. Judge Thomas Clay was taken into custody, his trial imminent. He no longer held the power to manipulate or instill terror, the web of dark influence that had once surrounded him unraveling, like the fragile chains he had hoped would bind others. Natchez began the slow process of healing, though none would forget the horrors that lay beneath the courtroom floor. The missing servants were remembered not just as victims, but as the unwitting catalysts for a reckoning that changed a town. The story of Thomas Clay's wicked rituals was far from just a tale of terror. It was a reminder of how unchecked power can corrupt absolutely, and how courage and unity stand as the only bulwarks against darkness. The sun rose over Natchez that dawn with a new promise, its light piercing the scars of the past. Justice, once buried beneath clay and secret rites, had finally been restored. In the weeks following Judge Thomas Clay's dramatic capture beneath the courthouse, Natchez felt as though it was waking from a long and terrible nightmare. The weight of fear and suspicion that had suffused the town for months began to lift, replaced gradually by a fragile but growing sense of hope. However, the road to healing was anything but smooth. The courthouse, which had once been the judge's domain of terror, was now the center of investigation and public outrage. The townspeople gathered in muted but determined crowds, demanding accountability and justice. The trial of Thomas Clay was announced, stirring a maelstrom of emotions across the community: relief, anger, disbelief, and a desire for closure. Thomas Clay's arrest did not immediately end the dark legacy he had carved into Natchez. Many feared that the corrupt web he had spun throughout the town, politicians, merchants, and clerics alike, might attempt to salvage his power or erase evidence of their complicity. Yet rumors of his arrest and the exposure of forbidden rituals emboldened those who had long been silenced. Abigail Turner became a figure both celebrated and scrutinized. Some hailed her as a hero for exposing the truth, while others whispered doubts and resentments, fueled by years of loyalty to the judge. The divide in Natchez remained, though the dark secrecy that had empowered Clay was broken. The trial itself was a spectacle unlike any before witnessed in the town. Courtrooms overflowed with curious townsfolk, anxious families of the missing servants, and legal representatives assigned to the accused. Thomas Clay appeared gaunt but defiant, his silver hair hanging loosely, and his eyes revealing flashes of the man who once ruled with cold certainty. Prosecutors presented the overwhelming evidence uncovered by Abigail, Samuel, and Sheriff Johnson. Detailed accounts of the disappearances, witness testimonies attesting to the judge's cruel demeanor, and the discovery of the underground chambers and clay effigies all painted a damning portrait. Testimony from former servants who had narrowly escaped the court's grip added powerful voices to the case, recounting strange sounds, bizarre rituals, and the unyielding coldness of the judge's gaze. The town saw the frightening reality of the man they had once revered. Defense attorneys, desperate and determined, attempted to cast doubt on the evidence, portraying the clay effigies as art projects or harmless folk traditions. They argued that the judge's growing paranoia and erratic behavior stemmed from stress rather than malice, but public sentiment had shifted irrevocably. The jury, composed mostly of townsfolk, carried the heavy burden of deciding the fate of a man whose actions had shattered so many lives. The courtroom buzzed with tension, every word weighed and dissected. When the verdict was finally delivered, guilty on multiple counts of murder and abuse of power, an overwhelming mix of relief and solemnity washed over Natchez. Judge Thomas Clay was sentenced to life in prison, and the courthouse that had been his fortress of darkness was declared a place of penitence. Yet, even as Clay's physical power was broken, the emotional and psychological scars lingered. Families of the missing servants grappled with grief and the painful process of closure, many unsure if justice could truly heal the wounds inflicted by years of terror. The clay effigies, once symbols of fear and control, were removed carefully and buried with reverence in a new cemetery dedicated to the lost servants. This act was a powerful moment for the town, an effort to restore dignity and honor to those who had suffered in silence. In the aftermath, Natchez saw the emergence of new leaders, men and women committed to rebuilding trust in the justice system, reforming corrupt institutions, and fostering a community where no one lived in fear of unchecked power. Abigail Turner continued to advocate for justice, her voice now one of cautious optimism. But there were lingering questions. How deep did the corruption truly run? Had all accomplices been accounted for? And what of the darker forces hinted at in Clay's rituals? Were they simply superstition, or did something more sinister linger beneath the surface? These questions haunted the townspeople as they moved forward. Some quietly left Natchez, unwilling to live under the shadow of its past. Others stayed, drawing strength from the knowledge that their courage had brought long overdue light. The courthouse itself underwent renovation, its hidden chambers sealed permanently. Yet the stories of that fearful place persisted in whispered legends, passed down by generations wary of granting power without scrutiny. A memorial was erected in the town square, honoring the missing servants and celebrating the resilience of those who fought to uncover the truth. The inscription read simply, "Justice unveiled, courage reborn." In private moments, Abigail reflected on the journey, from quiet schoolteacher to beacon of truth, and the price paid not just by the victims, but by everyone who dared to stand up against darkness. Her resolve remained steadfast to ensure that Natchez would never again fall under the shadow of unchecked power. The tale of Thomas Clay and his wicked rituals became a cautionary legend. It reminded the community that vigilance was the guardrail separating justice from tyranny. Through healing and remembrance, Natchez found the strength to reclaim its soul, proving that even the darkest chapters can lead to dawn. And though the spirits of those who suffered beneath the courthouse were finally at rest, their story lived on in the hearts of those who refused to forget, their memory a lasting testament to the power of truth and resilience in the face of evil. The heavy, humid air of Natchez in late 1849 felt thicker than ever, as if even the atmosphere mourned the vanished souls beneath the courthouse. The once unified town had fractured, its people split between loyalty to Judge Thomas Clay and the growing fear that justice had been irreparably corrupted. This division fractured families, friendships, and the very fabric of the community. While some townsfolk still fiercely defended the judge, believing the accusations to be scandalous fabrications aimed at dismantling the established order, others whispered of conspiracies and unspeakable rights that promised eternal domination by the ruthless man who presided over the local courts. Miss Abigail Turner's revelations had sparked hope and fear in equal measure. At the center of this turmoil, Abigail became a reluctant symbol of resistance. Her courage in exposing the judge's dark secrets drew wary allies, disgruntled servants, grieving families, and those who had long suspected that beneath Natchez's genteel exterior lurked something sinister. Yet this fragile alliance was met with obstacles at every turn. The Clay family, powerful and well-connected, deployed their resources with cold precision. Newspaper columns praised the judge's steadfast service and condemned what they called dangerous rumors that threatened the stability of the region. Friends of Clay in business and politics worked tirelessly to undermine Abigail's credibility, branding her a troublemaker. Despite threats and warnings, Abigail refused to back down. She worked secretly with Samuel Powell, the young reporter eager to expose the truth, and Sheriff Caleb Johnson, who had grown disillusioned with the justice system he once trusted. Together they began piecing together the fragments of the terrifying ritual cycle that bound Judge Clay to the missing servants. It was during a secret meeting in the cramped back room of a tavern that they uncovered the judge's motive beyond simple cruelty and obsession. In his pursuit of absolute control, Thomas Clay believed that by burying the servants beneath his courtroom and performing dark rituals, he could invoke ancestral powers to maintain his rule indefinitely. The journal Abigail had found spoke of ancient forces tied to the earth itself, spirits that could be commanded, imprisoned, and used. The clay effigies were more than symbolic graves. They were vessels of magic binding human souls to the judge's will. These rituals demanded the living serve as tokens of loyalty, and in death, their spirits were ensnared to fuel his unyielding grasp. News of these dark practices spread quietly, stirring panic and a sense of helplessness among those who feared that disturbing such forces might lead to even worse consequences. Yet, the deeper they delved, the more layers unfolded. Allegiances between local politicians, corrupt law enforcement, and even clergymen who turned a blind eye for personal gain. Abigail and Samuel realized their battle was not only against Thomas Clay, but against a network of silence and complicity. Every visit to the courthouse revealed new horrors: hidden tunnels, faint inscriptions carved into wooden beams, and the faint echo of whispered chants that lingered in the corridors. The pressure began to take its toll. Some in the faction pushed for immediate public exposure of the judge's crimes, while others advocated for meticulous collection of proof, wary of triggering a backlash that could destroy any hope of reform. Abigail walked a fine line between urgency and caution, knowing that one misstep could lead to her own disappearance. One chilling night, as Abigail returned home from a meeting, she noticed a shadow lurking near her doorway. The figure disappeared before she could get a clear view, but the warning was clear. The judge's reach extended far beyond the courtroom. Fear became constant company, but so did determination. Meanwhile, Judge Clay seemed unnerved, a subtle shift visible in his behavior. His commanding presence wavered for brief moments, eyes darting towards the dark corners of his chambers as though sensing invisible threats. The calculated coldness cracked with glimpses of paranoia, his grip tightening on the threads of power. In a daring move, Sheriff Johnson managed to enter the courthouse and retrieve more of the judge's secret documents hidden away in a concealed compartment beneath his desk. These documents included correspondence detailing Clay's interactions with obscure groups interested in occult knowledge, revealing that the judge was not acting alone. This network stretched beyond Natchez, suggesting a larger web of influence and dark dealings tied to the region's elite. The missing servants were just pawns in a much greater scheme of control and terror. With this knowledge, Abigail, Samuel, and Sheriff Johnson faced an impossible choice: go public and face retaliation, or continue their underground struggle. As word leaked sporadically into the newspapers, townsfolk's faith in the justice system eroded. Some families withdrew their children from schools, workers refused jobs connected to the courthouse, and nightly vigilante meetings grew in secrecy and intensity. The battle lines were drawn. One particularly stormy evening, a clandestine group gathered in an abandoned warehouse on the edge of town. There, under flickering lanterns, an oath was sworn to expose the judge and free the spirits trapped beneath the floorboards. Abigail spoke passionately, her voice resolute despite the dangers. "We cannot let fear bind us as Thomas Clay does to his victims," she declared. "Justice isn't just in courts, it's in our hands and our hearts." Yet the judge was not idle. As the pressure mounted, he summoned a select few trusted allies to perform a final, more potent ritual beneath the courthouse. This ceremony, cloaked in secrecy and marked by sinister symbols, was intended to solidify his power permanently, binding the judge forever to the ancient forces he so desperately sought to command. The night of the ritual brought an oppressive stillness over Natchez, broken only by distant thunder and the soft rustle of leaves. In the courthouse basement, figures cloaked in dark robes chanted low incantations, while the judge stood at the center, hands raised, eyes closed in fervent concentration. Outside, the town seemed to hold its breath. Those who knew whispered prayers and hoped for intervention from forces greater than human cruelty. The fate of Natchez hung by a fragile thread, but Abigail and her allies were ready. Armed with the evidence gathered and the courage amassed through months of struggle, they prepared to confront the judge's dark power head-on. Their fight was no longer just for missing servants or revealed secrets. It was a battle for the soul of their community. The courthouse floors, stained with secrets and the whispers of imprisoned souls, awaited the reckoning. Whether the light of truth would finally pierce the darkness or be extinguished forever was a question only time would answer. As the first chapter in a grim new phase of this story closed, the line between justice and vengeance blurred further. Thomas Clay's wicked rituals had cast a shadow longer than the town could easily escape, but the awakening of resistance promised something new: hope born from courage, and the possibility that even the darkest curses could be broken. The dust had barely settled in Natchez when whispers began to spread again. Whispers that suggested some shadows refused to be cast aside as easily as clay broken beneath the courthouse floor. Though Judge Thomas Clay was imprisoned and his rituals halted, the legacy of his dark reign remained a challenging burden for the town to carry. Among the lingering fears was the question of whether Clay's influence had truly been eradicated, or if pieces of his sinister network still lurked in quiet corners, waiting for an opportunity to reassert control. Abigail Turner, now recognized not only as a courageous townsperson but as a guardian of justice, found her work far from done. Natchez was no longer simply recovering. It was confronting its own reflection in the mirror of history, re-examining the practices and prejudices that had allowed a man like Clay to rise. The families of the vanished servants faced new challenges, grappling with grief and the harsh reality that justice, while served, could not bring their loved ones back. Abigail organized meetings to support those left behind, fostering a foundation of community resilience that sought to transform sorrow into strength. Nonetheless, there were occasional outbreaks of fear and suspicion. Some townsfolk believed that the curse tied to the Clay effigies had seeped into the fabric of the town itself, that the land beneath Natchez was forever stained with unresolved sorrow. These beliefs spawned stories of restless spirits and haunted places, lending a folklore dimension to the tragedy. This blending of fact and legend began to draw attention beyond Natchez. Scholars of the occult, historians, and even curious travelers arrived to study the courthouse site, eager to uncover evidence of the judge's rights and to understand the cultural context that permitted such atrocities. Abigail welcomed some visitors, especially those committed to learning and preserving truth. She understood that knowledge was a powerful tool to prevent repetition of dark chapters, but she also remained vigilant, aware that some seekers were drawn by morbid fascination rather than the pursuit of justice. Amid these renewed interests, small archaeological digs revealed artifacts, pieces of pottery inscribed with strange symbols, fragments of the Clay effigies, and hidden compartments that attested to the judge's meticulous secrecy. Each discovery was bittersweet, a reminder of lives lost and power abused. The town's leaders embarked on a mission to heal by creating educational programs focusing on civic responsibility, ethics, and the importance of checking authority. Schools included lessons about the history of Natchez, the good and the terrible, so future generations would remember the lessons etched into their soil. Yet not all residents accepted this reckoning. Some elders held fast to denial, refusing to acknowledge how systemic corruption allowed one man's cruelty to flourish. Discussions at town meetings could grow heated, revealing how deep wounds schooled in silence ran beneath Natchez's genteel surface. Meanwhile, Thomas Clay's trial and imprisonment became case studies in law enforcement and judicial ethics, inspiring reforms that reached beyond Mississippi. His extreme example highlighted the dangers of unchecked power and the necessity for transparency and accountability in governance. Despite all attempts at moving forward, traces of Judge Clay's wicked rituals persisted in the collective memory, at times invoked as cautionary tales around fires and at community gatherings. These stories served as somber reminders that evil can flourish where fear and silence prevail. Samuel Powell published a series of articles chronicling the events and their aftermath, blending journalistic detail with the human stories that gave weight to facts. His writings brought national attention to Natchez, drawing support and solidarity from across the country. Meanwhile, the courthouse underwent a symbolic transformation. Its once dark and oppressive halls were refurbished to serve as a museum and memorial, dedicated to the history it endured and the lives it changed. Visitors walked through exhibits that recounted the tales of the missing servants, the discovery of the hidden chambers, and the courageous fight that dismantled the judge's reign. The project helped the community reclaim the space, converting a place of fear into one of education and remembrance. Children learned about justice, resilience, and the complex nature of human morality within its walls. But underlying these hopeful changes was a collective understanding that vigilance was essential. The town established community watch groups and reporting mechanisms, ensuring no individual could accumulate unchecked power again. Abigail, Samuel, and Sheriff Johnson remained pillars of this new order. Their alliance, born from shared suffering and unyielding commitment to truth, endured as a beacon for a society still grappling with its dark past but determined to forge a brighter future. On quiet evenings, Abigail sometimes visited the old cemetery, where the clay effigies of the servants had been interred. As she knelt among modest headstones, she whispered promises of remembrance and justice to those whose lives had been stolen. The past had scarred Natchez, but through confrontation, courage and collective will, the town had begun to heal. The story of Judge Thomas Clay was no longer just a tale of wicked rituals and buried souls. It was a testament to the power of resilience, the necessity of accountability, and the enduring fight for justice. As time went on, the residents of Natchez carried forward not only the memory of those who suffered, but the lesson that evil can only triumph where silence reigns. Their shared history, dark as it was, became the foundation for a renewed commitment to community, fairness, and compassion. The wicked rituals that had cast a terrible shadow beneath the courthouse floor had been exposed, broken and buried, not just beneath earth and clay, but beneath the unyielding light of truth and remembrance. And in the hearts of those who dared to confront the darkness, hope prospered, forging a legacy that no shadow, no matter how deep, could ever erase. The final chapter in the tale of Judge Thomas Clay and the wicked rituals that terrorized Natchez was not marked by grand spectacle or violent confrontation. Instead, it unfolded through quiet acts of healing and remembrance, weaving a narrative of redemption that resonated through the town for generations to come. With Clay safely behind bars and his dark influence shattered, Natchez began rebuilding not only its physical structures, but also its fractured community spirit. The courthouse, once a symbol of oppression and death, reopened its doors, this time as a place of reflection, learning and justice restored. Abigail Turner, having emerged as one of the town's foremost leaders, dedicated herself to ensuring that the pain and suffering inflicted by Thomas Clay would never be forgotten, nor repeated. She spearheaded the creation of a memorial garden on the courthouse grounds, a serene space filled with native plants and soft sunlight, where the names of the missing servants were etched in stone. The garden was designed as a sanctuary, a place where people could gather to honor the lives lost, to contemplate the burdens of power, and to affirm the community's commitment to justice. It became a focal point for annual commemorations, where whispered prayers mingled with the rustling leaves. Samuel Powell, whose investigative work had brought the dark story into public view, continued to write extensively. His articles and books chronicled not only the harrowing events, but also the possibility of resilience in the aftermath of tragedy. His storytelling helped Natchez find a place in the wider world, transforming the tale from one of horror to one of hope. Sheriff Caleb Johnson remained a steadfast protector of the town, reinforcing reforms within the local law enforcement system. His leadership ensured that the structures that once enabled Clay's wickedness were dismantled and replaced with transparency and accountability. Officers were trained to value the dignity of all citizens, and community advisory boards were established to monitor courthouse proceedings. Though the community made great strides, scars from the dark era lingered. Some families, even years later, struggled to find peace. Unanswered questions remained like faint echoes in the wind, reminding all that healing was a process, not a destination. As time passed, stories of the judge's rituals became woven into the fabric of Natchez's folklore, not as tales of fear, but as lessons. Parents shared with their children the importance of questioning authority, standing up against injustice, and protecting the vulnerable. Educational programs incorporated the history of Thomas Clay as case studies in ethics, law, and human rights. Students explored how the pursuit of unchecked power corrupted a man who once was a respected jurist, and the social conditions that allowed such corruption to flourish. The physical remnants of the past, the clay effigies, the hidden chambers beneath the courthouse, were preserved carefully within the local museum. Visitors from near and far came to learn about the intertwining of justice and evil, marveling at how a community had courageously torn off the veil of secrecy to reveal the truth. This transparency was critical to the town's rebirth. As Natchez embraced openness and acknowledgement of its painful history, it strengthened the social bonds that had frayed under Clay's shadow. New leaders emerged, committed to fostering a culture of inclusion and respect. The final words in Samuel Powell's most acclaimed work, Beneath the Courtroom Floor, encapsulate the spirit that carried the town forward. In confronting the darkest corners of our history, we find the brightest light of possibility. Justice is not merely a system, but a living commitment, a promise to those silenced that their voices will never again be buried in shadows. For Judge Thomas Clay, life in prison was a mere echo of the power he once wielded. Isolated from the world he sought to dominate, his final days were marked by reflection and remorse, though whether true repentance ever fully reached him remains a matter of speculation. The citizens of Natchez chose a different legacy, one rooted in courage, community, and the pursuit of justice. Their story stands as a testament that even in the face of profound darkness, humanity's capacity for redemption and remembrance can prevail. The courthouse where wicked rituals once thrived now stands as a beacon, a reminder that vigilance, truth, and the collective will of a community can dismantle even the most entrenched evils. As the sun sets over the Mississippi, casting golden hues over the old brick facades and quiet streets, Natchez breathes a little easier. The shadows beneath the courtroom floor have been laid to rest, replaced by memories honored and lessons hard-earned. This is not just a story of darkness and despair, but of unyielding light. Proof that even the deepest wounds can heal if met with truth, courage, and unwavering resolve. And so ends the haunting saga of Thomas Clay, the judge who sought to bury his servants beneath the courtroom floor, only to have his own legacy buried in the unshakable foundation of justice restored. Every family hides secrets, some so dark they should never see the light of day. Here, we open the doors to those shadowed pasts, uncovering hidden crimes, silent pacts, and stories that echo like ghosts through the halls of memory. If you've made it this far, it means you also carry that forbidden curiosity. So don't hesitate. Subscribe to the channel now, turn on the bell, and follow our next revelations. Because every day, new secrets emerge, and only those who dare to face the truth remain to hear them.